So the agenda for today is we will be hearing about traditional farming from Bobby Stone and Sterling Johnson. And then I will speak about Native Seed Search and how we are stewarding seeds at Native Seed Search. Andrea will talk about, Andrea Carter, who works at Native Seed Search, will talk about working with partners throughout the region to grow out seeds. And then we're going to hear from Dr. Sherman and Dr. Fish, thinking about plant protection and some of the legal frameworks that are happening globally. The idea is to have a conversation today, and for us that are working on the ground and for the farmers to learn about what's happening at an international level and at a policy level, and for the policymakers and the academics to hear what's happening on the ground. So it's a way for us to educate ourselves, to empower ourselves, and to try to affect policies that protect these seeds that we care about. I'll start by introducing Bobby. Robert Stone. Bobby is the former Lieutenant Governor for Gila River Indian Community. He is the Vice Chair of the Native Seed Search Board. As he mentioned, he recently came back, and we're so happy to have him and to have his experience from a long time ago and back on the board. He's recognized as a spiritual leader, traditional singer, traditional farmer, artist, and Indigenous seed and food advocate. Bobby attended Central Arizona College, where he earned a degree in agricultural technology, and then continued on to the University of Arizona. He's a lifelong farmer, and he maintains a seed bank with an array of Indigenous crops. So Bobby will be our first speaker. After that will be Sterling. I will introduce Sterling, so he'll follow Bobby, and then we'll have a time for questions, and then we'll go on to the next segment. Sterling Johnson was born and raised on the Tohono Nation, and he's a proud tribal member who represented his tribe by ranching and competing in rodeos. Today he's a traditional dryland farmer and an urban farmer. He worked at the Aho Center for Sustainable Agriculture for 10 years, eventually becoming a co-executive director. He has a breadth of knowledge in traditional farming, seed saving, community outreach, and mentorship.
My name is Bobby Stone. I'm from the Alexandra, Gila River Indian Community, South Central Arizona. We're 30 miles south of Phoenix. If you're on I-10 coming this way, you'll go right through the Gila Indian Community, which is 373,000 approximately acre land of our people. And as a lot of you know, we have our reservations now that were established throughout history. So that describes my community. I always tell the younger generations that don't ever think that you're stuck inside boundaries of a reservation. Because historically, our people, we were one with the Tohono, Achin, and Maricopa, Salt River. Then we got Pima-speaking Indigenous group in Mexico also. So 5 groups that were all around in the southwest area at one time before we had the Spanish missionaries and Europeans come over. That was our land base for all those years. So we're always reminded of where we're at, what affects us, and the territory we once had. So, but that's how modern day history is. Here in the community is about 23,000. A little over 23,000 Indigenous tribal members. A little over half live in the community or in the reservation, and others live off Phoenix, other cities, LA, and we heard recently there are some that live in Europe also. So they stay in contact with us a lot of times. So our community is known as, our legacy is farming, agricultural. The history says that we have, I just named 2 locations, what is called Snake Town now, or we call it Koiki, where the Uukam farmed along the Gila River when it ran year-round. Today, we can still see the banks of the Gila River. Places are a mile wide and in different levels of width. Year-round, the river, and that's how our ancestors farmed around there for all those years. The traditional crops that most tribes are known for, corn, beans, and squash. One crop that stands out to me, is, which we still grow in Native Seed Search, look for that seed, is the Aboriginal Pima cotton. I still grow that. I've grown it for over a decade, just in a small plot that I had. It was like I had like 2 or 3 rows, about 2 or 3 feet wide, and about 4 rows. And that Aboriginal Pima cotton is perennial. They'll bloom back in the spring. So what you do is just trim it down about 4 inches from the ground when it dies back in the fall and the winter, and then it blooms back about this time of the year, and you start all over. So in about, I would say 8 years, something like that, I was able to save at least 40 pounds of seed, hand-picked, and then separating the lint from the seed. I have a plan for working with that. Our Aboriginal Pima cotton is a cotton, of course, it's almost like, it's a wild cotton because it grows from 3-4 feet to 5-6 feet tall. And as you know, modern cotton, they've worked with it and developed a cotton that's uniform, 3-4 foot tall, longer fiber, different traits like that. But our Pima cotton is short fiber, so you don't see it in the in the commercial time frame all along. And these other cottons were developed so that cotton, because its fiber is short, they don't like to run it through the machines to weave it, having to comb it and then to spin it into cotton and weaving. So, but that doesn't mean that we can't do that today, because our ancestors done it all these years, thousands of years. They worked with it. So that's my plan, to come back and do something with that cotton, because you see around in universities or museums, they have displays of cotton, Pima cotton. But I like to work with it again, so that's the reason I'm saving the seed. And it's something that I want to tell the kids: grow it with your hand in the ground. Pick the seed with your hand, spin it, comb it with your hand, make something with the loom with your hand. Just go through that process. It's a journey that our ancestors went through, and if you can do that, continue that process with your kids of the future also, even though we have to live in a modern time and work with it in the modern ways with machinery and all those things. And that's the thing with a lot of our seeds that we grow today. I do backyard gardening, and then I have a 35-acre farm with my sister. We're trying to increase that acreage and plant other traditional crops. In the, say, half-acre, I can dedicate that to, in the 35 acres to grow, to increase our seeds for traditional crops. The bob, the tabby bean, hoy, our hoon, our 6-day corn, howard, the lima beans, all those wheat was introduced by Spanish missionaries through this area and all the way to California. And so we have the Pima cloud wheat, and then we have the Sonoran wheat. It's made a comeback with interest in the food business, and one of our farmers, Ramona Lawton, has increased. They have a 4,000 or 5,000 acre farm, but they've dedicated part of it to traditional crops. And I know other groups have done that around this area, Santa Beer, and then the Aho Center, and Aho, Cells. Different areas have come up with this idea and plan of how to, if you're a big farmer, you dedicate a part of your acres to the traditional crops. And I've seen a lot of success go on in Salt River also. So that's what I've been doing all my life, is growing these seeds. As I was young, growing up in the late 50s, early 60s, our families grew our own corn, beans, and squash. We're a subsistence family. We have a canal delivery system. Back then, we had a dirt ditch. We had to clean it by hand, shovels, and you have to have a clean ditch before you receive water. So I literally dug ditches with my family. For some reason, doing that as a kid, like that, seeing my dad, my uncle, and my grandparents take a shovel and dig a ditch when it gets filled up with silt. Later on, with the industrial period coming in, we finally got horses and old farm tools, and then an old John Deere tractor. I learned how to drive that when I was like 10, 11 years old. All my brothers learned how to do that early on. So that was quite an experience. We harvested by hand, taproot bean. There's always techniques in the past how we harvest, how we plant, harvest, and use our foods, traditional foods. So the taproot bean, for an example, I'll tell you again, we only grew it when the rains come in the summer, June, July. Then we have a short growing period in August too. We call it Shamport, the short growing season. So we plant it by hand, and then the taproot beans, different varieties, and we harvest it by pulling it, uprooting it. This is in the middle of the summer, and let it lay there, and it's 120 degrees, right? It'll dry in a couple of days. Then we walk the fields and turn it over so the other side dries. Then we have these thick canvas tarps we lay down, and then we pile them up with pitchforks and then beat them with a stick, and then winnow it. Meaning when if it's a little windy, and then you can take a bucket or something and put all the seed and the trash that came within one bucket and then spill it in the other one, or just do it on the tarp with a shovel or a basket, and it blows all that chaff away and it gets clean. I still do that today with the wheat and the taproot beans. Wait for a windy day, and it doesn't take very long to do it if you have a pretty good wind going. So that's how we harvested our taproot beans back in the day. Everything was by hand. Our relatives came over, we harvested, we grew up some Milo type grain for feed, and we'd flip them off with a knife, and then thrash it with horses, and bag it up in burlap bags. I was watching my grandpa sewing those bags together with a big old long needle and thread. I learned how to do that. We loaded them in old trucks. There was a place called Old Traders. We had a lot of these trading posts around. We haul it over there, and we didn't sell it. They only allow you to exchange it for food. So we did the same thing with firewood, cutting it with axes and hauling it over there. So that's just examples of what we did when we were young. As I said earlier, our whole our ancestors, they did the farming along the Gila. They grew the original Pima cotton, the taproot beans. Those are some of the oldest crop seeds that we have around, and you'll see them you read a lot of books. In my area, for my people, Pima Remembers, Legends of the Pimas, and then there's a book about the acculturation of the Pimas by the Spanish missionaries. It has a lot of information in there. Even though we have not talked to we may not have talked to some of our elders or in our own families or just elders of the community, but you read these books that they were interviewed, and whatever they spoke of in these books, it's just like somebody sitting there telling you in this modern time. So there's a lot of information in those books about our crops. I think the guy's name is Mario Rea. He has the most recent book that I know of, the Botany of the Heirloom Pimas. That book is about like 2 inches thick. That's a good source for me of our elders telling about our crop history too. So just wanted to let you know on those activities growing up. And I will say maybe a couple of years in my lifetime, I'm 69 years old now, a couple of years that I did not put a seed in the ground. I just like doing that, growing year in and year out, and seed saving. And then we still save in jars, just like Native Seed Search at home. My dad used to have barrels. He'll fill those up with the beans, and people will come and ask for it because they knew that he grew it. So we still do that today. Some of the changes from back then on our traditional crops is storing them in the freezer to make them last a little longer. Back in the day, they just stored them in the oak houses where it's cool, and saved it that way. I think some things that have changed also from traditionally to now is different pests that come through. The most memorable one I have, unfortunately, was about the whitefly. We hear that whitefly came in the 90s to this area. So the whitefly can attack your plants, especially when they're small. They'll nibble on the leaves and they'll just kill them that way. So we've had to change our growing times. Now we can grow it in the springtime. To me, it seems like whiteflies come around when the summer rains come. So we grow it in the spring, and still harvest June, July, and then if you want to plant it during the monsoon time, you try to get it in a little earlier, and if they get tall, 4 to 5 inches, and then they can survive a little bit. Even in my garden, I spray them down with water. I try to grow traditionally and not use chemicals, and have to spray water on them all the time and keep them off. But it's hard to grow them in our traditional time in the summer rains time because of the whitefly. And now we have our climate change also. And I think that truly our seeds are already adapted to these conditions and short growing season. They can stand the heat, but now they're meeting the challenge again where the temperatures are getting higher and they're already kind of accustomed to it, right? So just thinking, well, they're going to get more accustomed to it if you keep growing them. So that's part of the mindset that I have about it. That's very important to know. Going back to the Pima cotton, Aboriginal cotton, so I tell my people at home that you see Pima cotton in the stores today. It's a label, a trademark, Pima cotton. And our kids and younger people at home mistaken that's our cotton. It's just a name after the Pima people, which Pima isn't our real name. Our real name is Akmaratam. But you see that trademark. It's not the original Pima cotton. It's a cotton that was produced at Gila River back in the early 1900s. They had an experimental station, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, University of Arizona, went out to our people and wanted to show us different crops that we could raise and experiment with not our traditional crops. And they had a place called a school farm in Sacaton, which is call it the capital city of Gila River. And they showed our people and hired them how to try different crop seeds. And so they brought out an Egyptian cotton and a Yuma cotton from Yuma, and they found that Yuma cotton. And Yuma brought it there and crossed it with the Egyptian cotton, and they liked what they saw and selected the seed from that. And that what became to them, not our people, but the researchers that were there, developed that seed. And it's in recognition of the Gila River Pimas allowing us to come in here and helping them out and try to grow different crops that we developed this seed here. We'll name this Pima cotton. So it's Egyptian and Yuma cotton that was selected for that trait. And what you see in the stores now, that's what is called Pima cotton, not our original Pima cotton that our old ancestors grew all along. So that's something I always try to remind our people, because today on our tribal farm, it's a 10,000 acre farm. At home, I worked there and I managed that for 10 years too. I worked there most of my life, and then they grow the commercial Pima cotton today, and then I see them say, this is Pima cotton history from back then, but it's not really true facts. So there's something to share with you about that, and I think I'll stop there and just mention some things that are near and dear to you. You know, small things mean a lot to us. When you get older, you don't think about it when you're young and you're just playing around or kidding around and stuff. But things that your parents, my parents done that stand out later on, and my parents aren't here anymore, and I really feel honored to say that they taught us a lot. I come from a big family. There was 6 of us boys and 8 girls in my family. Back we didn't have any running water, no electricity until I was like in junior high school, I believe. But they taught us a lot. They taught me how to put a canvas tarp across this dirt ditch with sticks. You put a log on the ground across the ditch banks, put sticks into the ditch. Sometimes the water's already running. Then you get this canvas tarp, you gotta put it all the way across and stab it into the dirt, the mud, to stop the water, and let it flow into your field. If you get really good at it, you can do it by yourself. And I have, and I'm proud of it because my dad taught me that. And you just put the tarp on one end, put dirt on it, then you gotta walk around those sticks carrying the other end of the tarp with your shovel, get to the other end, stand on it, and then stab it into the mud in the ditch to stop the water. That was something that I'm really proud that my dad taught me how to do that. Just little things like that. He'll make a little wooden scraper out of lumber for his shovel, because we have clay soil over there. It sticks to your boots and your shovel, and then you scrape the mud over your shovel. That I see all the men working, sitting around doing that. So he showed me how to make those too. So I did it. It's a good feeling to know those things and keep those memories of your family, what they taught you too. So I'll stop with that and let the next speaker come, and I'm glad to have you here and listen to what we're going to offer today. Okay, thank you.
Whichever way you want to say it. Good morning, good day, everyone. My name is Sherman Johnson. I am from Tohono Nation. It's home. It's actually where I was born. I would say last in my generation that can actually say that. I was born at the South Hospital, HS. Now it's known as Tohono Nation Health Services now. So it used to be IHS, but now it's just health services now. Alexandra said, I grew up there. I grew up ranching. Actually, this is not part of themselves, it's our ranch. It was really something different when I think about it. And very few people are actually growing up that way. It wasn't until like December 2008 that actually our ranch actually finally got electricity. My ranch has been in our family for more than 100 years. Didn't have running water, so the only way we could get water was going out and getting it from the well. And that's one of the things that I grew up with. It wasn't until my last sibling was born that we decided to move to a place that we call Newfoundland, or Witchwood. And that's where, now for me, and I'm back there now. I'm also I'm on council for my community, representing what we call Chickacook. So, and it's really been something unique that in the last 12 years, more than 12 years, I have applied to be an apprentice for a nonprofit. I didn't know where it was going to go. Most of my time was training horses. And if I wasn't training horses, I was going to rodeos. And my life was 24/7 on the road or out in the open. So, I didn't really, I had a home to come to, but it was just to be there. It wasn't like a home I laid my roots down and built something out, because everything just changed. For most of my life, I got to compete, all over Arizona. I know Arizona. I know all the back roads. I know all the cool places to go eat. They're still around. It just really knew how they navigate. And I was fortunate enough to travel to Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, So really got to explore the world. And when I came home from the last rodeo I came to, I was very injured. I guess frustrated because it was something my body was telling me I'm not ready. I'm not ready, and I knew that thing. And in the end, I always heard, your body's, it's not what it used to be, where it bounced back, or it's not going to be the same once you injure yourself over and over again. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just take some time, I'll figure out what I'm going to do next. The next rodeo, I feel better, so I decided to do this apprenticeship program. My first week on the job, my last 2 days, we were off for a whole day. On a farm was located out in the middle of the desert, just south of Stewardship, which is called Tropical Farm, and that's where that first week of the job I decided it was crazy. I didn't really think anything of it other than it was just a job. It was until the end of the season where I finally, I was starting to see the value, and I started to learn about the culture behind it. And that's where my journey started. Because I knew all about wakia, himidak, wakia, yoke, all the things that go into ranching. I knew all that. I've been taught that since I was a kid. But agriculture was different, and that was something that I really started learning. Of course, we always hear from our politicians, from our leaders, people always say, second largest tribe, in the U.S., and that's just the U.S. side. That's not including some of our lands that are in Mexico, some of our sacred sites that we have. A lot of things that I'm still learning from certain elders from across Mexico, and they are going through a difficult time. I won't get into that, but I'm grateful that our people held on to a lot of things that are valuable to us. So one of the things that I got to experiment, not just in apprenticeship with Toga, but was granite farm, our chin farm, and it really puzzled me, but it also always made sense because that, for us, we live on the bottom of the nation, we just know when the rains come, especially when those rains are in that area, you either be at home or just plan to not be home for a couple hours. And it really, when I started hearing about that, where people grew land with the rain, I was like, well, why would you do that? When you have water, everything at your fingertips. Now I'm changing my whole thinking about how we can keep this practice alive, because it was something that hasn't been done in decades. For how long, I don't know. I keep asking for different people that do agriculture or know about agriculture, and everybody has a date when they last seen someone plant with the rains. So from going from an apprenticeship and going into the work that I started with Aho Center for Agriculture, which I was ended up being the co-director up to this past February. I decided to step down. One of my focuses was really wanting to really figure out how this was done. There are some videos that people have said from 100 years ago saying that dragon farming was, successful, every 3 years. That's very disheartening, especially when you're wanting to save seeds, and seeds are so valuable for us as native people. As not only do they have ties to culture, not only they have ties to songs and ceremonies, but we go back into our people, our genetics are meant. We taught ourselves to be here. Right now, this was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, or even 20 years ago. People will be going out right now harvesting wild trail ducks right now to prepare to go through the summer. We don't do that now. We forgot about it. But there's some of us that still do that, and so teaching about that. And that's what I like about what I have always done. Is always taught, preserving. I've been working with youth and young adults for more than 30 years. That's all I know. I'm really good at it. So when I started learning how to do the dragon field at Pancho's farm towards the end of my apprenticeship, it made me think about how it's done. So I started replicating what was done at Pancho farm, and I found some things don't work and some things do work, and those practices are very different because with Mother Nature, you can't tell it to, hey, turn the heat down, or don't rain so much, or there's raining too much water, don't rain again, or please rain again. It's been more than a month since the last rain. That's very heartening. That's something that, when you start seeing, I have more appreciation for the cooking about that. Didn't do agriculture that way because they did understand that, the seeds were strong, but you had to work with that. And that's one of the things that is very hard to teach people, to work with the land. And I wish I could duplicate myself over and over again so I can actually watch different parts of the reservation and how they don't do this. But yet again, I'm on basing this off of what I can do at my own space. So this is which my family's property. So preparing the field, really getting it ready, and understanding that genetic diversity, it's not just in the seeds, it's what the seed takes from the environment. And that's one of the things that, for me, when I was at the house, we gave out seeds. We gave seeds to people because we wanted people to know that these seeds can survive in this area. Actually, those seeds right there are actually deep. This is actually my first purpose on the field that we turned over. Just on rainwater, it probably rained less than 3 inches, and still I was able to produce. And these are just as big as Ramona Farms beans that gets hundreds of thousands, if not millions of gallons of water. And I was able to grow that with just 3 inches of rain. So being able to do that, it helped me really navigate how to how to grow, especially doing these practices. Climate smart practices is what they're calling it now, where we're using what's natural to irrigate. And if if you're ever invited to our family home, you'll see there's and some of the people from Native research show this. There's no rain harvesting. There's no containers. This is just open land, using what naturally falls from the ground and comes around to the area. And the seeds are all just based on a little bit of luck. And it might seem cheesy, but a lot of faith, trusting that, and believing that the rain will come. Hoping that in the future people will understand that, not to take away from that, but give back. There are really a lot of cool things that are being done, not just in Tucson, Phoenix, but everywhere. Who are starting to realize, hey, we shouldn't be building a super mall or a theme park or shopping center. Let's think about our areas, because some of us, rely on this weather, and all of us rely on this weather. We hope that this rain keeps coming back, year after year, day after day, because this is what we need. We need this environment to sustain us. And if it doesn't, what do we do? And I don't even want to think about what people do, because it's never going to be good. Luckily, this picture here was really unique. It actually did rain right after I finished planting. Like I said, I'm still using what I was taught from Poncho Farms in row planting. I'm also experimenting with different other ways of planting. But yet again, the thing is, catching climate smart, really catching and using what is naturally there for you. This was after the rain. This was about 4 days after a monsoon rain that came through. I was very grateful for that. And these seeds can grow with very little water, And of course, for those growers out there, what it takes to grow food. And there was always tons of maintenance that has to happen in order for it to be successful. This is no different. For me, being in so many places at the same time made it hard for me to be there to make it nice and lush. Through all this thinking, seeds were able to prevail. We were able to harvest typically brown and white. Corn, which is always needs tons of water. That year, I was able to produce 68 corn. That's this way. So with that, I really, emphasize and teach about, seed sovereignty. It's as basic as growing your own food. It's as simple as this. Nothing is good. Nothing. You can go into the science and everything, but in the end, sovereignty is being able to do it. And do it for a reason. For me, It's probably the first time someone grew in this field in probably more than 20 years. No, actually, no, 40 years. In the village itself, probably more than 20 years since someone has grown in here. But we never produce this in the traditional way, in the traditional practice. No, it's always good. And it's always a good thing for the seed and for myself. But these are certain things that I had with the traditional crops that they would grow over the years from wheat, corn, the yellow needed watermelon, the squash. Typically, and I know there's a lot more that we can grow, sugar cane, but also just wanted to find, better ways to utilize our traditional foods, and make it more sustainable, make it more tolerable, being able to grow in the environment. And when we give out seeds, when I give out seeds, I tell people, grow them the best way you can. I'm almost done honing in the environment at which this little field is in, and being able to make a list of what traditional foods can be planted and when and where. But also the hardest thing is right. That's for me. This was I got to work with our apprentices and really make subtle changes in the hopes that to be successful. 2020 was a very hard year, not just because the pandemic happened, but it was the month that we saw the longest days of 100-degree weather. We really saw little to no rain. Rain getting in, knowing that was coming there. Just teaching people to be aware of the environment and what's there and what's not there. So with that, this is it for me. I'm happy to say that I'm a farmer, I'm a cowboy, I'm a rancher. Almost everything that's agriculture. The only thing I haven't gotten into was I was raised almost every certain type of animals that were turkey. I did raise pigs and goats and sheep. And I've done all that before. We consider turkey and an agricultural thing. That's it. But thank you all for letting me come out here and talk. Alexandra, Andrea, for inviting me last minute and kind of just put this together. But I'm really grateful that for me being able to talk about the work that my partner and I have done over the years, and wanting to find sustainable agricultural practices, taking the whole thing, making new improvements to it, and hoping to be able to teach it in a more successful way. So, thank you.
Yes.
You guys ever run into problems with wildlife?
Included Pablo Bear from TMCC and Joyce. They had, when we moved into cells and with RCC, we took over what used to be a Danny Lopez garden at the hospital. And these guys always told me, hey, we don't plant for that kind of nonsense, because when you try to plant, gophers will come in. And you think there's open space, there's no urban sprawl, there's no shopping centers. The desert is still scarce and hard to support food for wildlife. So, and then of course when cows and horses are taught to smell water when they're thirsty to go find it, you have that. So, I know my first year at the dry field at Poncho Farms, there was a coyote with a big old run off and squashing its mom, running off into the desert. And you can't unsee that. And then you can't unsee coyotes eating watermelon, javelinas. Of course, they are notorious for going after anything that's good.
Yeah.
And then also in Aho, what I learned was that birds like to eat tender leaves, and lizards like to eat tender leaves. So every year when I was in Aho, I was trying to plant tender leaves as early as possible because right now their body was at 93 right now, and we're sitting at 85. So the big difference, and they get there a whole lot faster than Tucson gets to that temperature. So my thing was always wanting to plant early, but of course you just don't know. You start to notice these things once you start putting your time into growing food. That's where in the end I was like, well, let me see if I can find another way, for these foods not to be eaten. And of course, Joyce and Cooper, right? You can try to grow something as early as you can, but of course, it's always going to attract animals. And that was probably one of the hardest things to grow on the nation, was knowing that there's always going to be animals there. So, but for us, as rabbits, cottontails, lizards, quails, doves, javelinas, coyotes are part of our main animals to watch out for. So throughout the year.
Thank you. That's such an interesting subject. I think it's a problem, issue, whatever you call it, for a lot of us here in the Southwest. I'm sure it's like that all around the world. So here in the community, we do have wild horses, the barrel horses. Been an issue all along, and I know our environmental department was asked by our tribal government to check into Roundup again. So they're looking into that because there's over 500 feral wild horses in the community that keep growing and growing, and donkeys too, burros. So in the field where we farm, that's where those animals those horses come across when they're hungry and want water, and they really got into the fields of our farmers. And all I can say is animals gotta eat like us too. So I get upset, but then I think we gotta think about all life forms in the world. So what do we do to think about them for their safety and for us to survive as people, to produce our food also for ourselves and animals? That's one issue we have. In backyard gardening, which I do too, I do have a fence now around my house, but people see my pictures on Facebook and everything, and they say, how do you do that? I try to plant a seed in the ground, the birds come and eat it. When it's time to harvest, like the wheat, they'll come and just start eating it once they find it in your garden plots. They won't do that out in the field if you have a lot of acres, and they may eat some of it, but not all of it. So that's the difference. So I have to protect my garden plots at home. Even when I start planting seeds in the ground, birds are smart. They'll know where I sometimes plant my seeds in a row, 4 inches apart if it's grain. They'll come along, you just see little holes in the ground where they just picked them up. I said, I knew it, I should have covered them. So I have some things that I buy, I just lay over it to protect it. And when it gets to about 2-3 inches tall, they're okay. Then you gotta protect them when you're ready to harvest the wheat or barley again, and they start maturing. The sparrows in my area will come and just start eating off the plant. So I get bird netting I put over there. If I have a 5 by 10 foot plot, I cover them. So you gotta protect your garden crops from start to end. And now I'm doing some, what we call no-till gardening. I put down hard wire cloth. I'm getting older and I don't want to dig around anymore, even though it's good exercise. So I start doing the no-till beds. And I'm getting pretty good at it. And been doing it for 3-4 years at home, but still you got to protect all your seedlings all the way to harvest. Most of them, sometimes they won't bother me. They want to experiment, but it's better to be safe than sorry. So, even though I got a fence around my house, I guess my neighbor's dogs are wild animals. They keep coming around and bothering my crops, getting in my garden. They'll dig around in there, poop in there, all those different things. So, all kinds of challenges. So you have to do what you can to protect them. That's what we do as farmers or gardeners. Thank you.
Background is my mother is from Argentina, and my father is from the U.S. And I lived in Argentina when I was young, and then my family moved to the U.S. So I'm bicultural and bilingual. And when we lived in Argentina, we would come to the U.S. And then when we lived here, we would go to Argentina to visit my mother's family. But I also had a unique experience in that for 4 generations, my mother's family has gone to Córdoba, to this rural part of Argentina. So even though I was a city kid, I always went to this part where there's a strong ranching culture and grew up very connected to the land and went horseback riding without any saddle or anything. We would go. Now I look at it and I think of myself at 5 doing that. I used to get thrown off the horses, and I think of my kids, and I'm like, oh my gosh. But I am very grateful for that upbringing, because it allowed me to look into 2 worlds and experience a duality that I think I influenced what I did. I studied international relations and then have worked in conservation in natural resources throughout Latin America. So as the executive director here, this was the first time I was working in the United States. But that diplomacy that I worked when I worked in other countries in Latin America is very important at Native Seed Search. So I will talk about that. My presentation is about a little bit of an introduction to the organization and also about our work developing a seed policy. This is just an introduction. I'm going to take about 10 minutes for my presentation so that we have plenty of time. But Native Seed Search is a nonprofit, and we conserve and share the seeds of the people in the desert Southwest and Mexico, so that these arid adopted crops may benefit communities in a nourishing, changing world. I also want to provide a land acknowledgement and a seed acknowledgement. Our office is here in Tucson on the ancestral homelands of the Tohono Nation and Pasquayaqui tribe. In Arizona, there are 22 federally recognized tribes. In our seed bank, through our seeds, there are 50 different indigenous communities that are represented from the Southwest and Mexico and into Guatemala. And we, as an organization, would not exist if it were not for the stewards, and mostly indigenous stewards of the seeds that we have. The seeds and the organization would not exist. So in terms of a context for why the organization existed, I do want to talk about dwindling food variety and what happened in terms of agrobiodiversity from about 1900 until 1983, when the organization was founded. There was a huge loss of diversity in our seeds. We often give the example of the corn, that in 1903, there were 307 commercially available seed. That means that a farmer could go and had a choice of selecting a different type of corn, and there was a great variety. By 1983, there was only 12. So this concern and this loss of crop biodiversity was occurring all over the world. And it had occurred, and it had occurred drastically in the Midwest here in the United States. So there was a lot of concern. So the founders of the organization were driven by this loss and by this concern. Within this context, at that time, there was a disconnect from farming and from agriculture. I think within Indigenous communities, that was felt even more profoundly. There was historical colonial losses of land and water access, physical displacement, and then there was racial environmental discrimination that occurred until very recently and still occurs today. So there was a real challenge to continue farming in this region, but also in across the United States. Today, much of Arizona land is used for commodity crops or is leased out. So the culture of the small farmer, that has also declined. NSS was, Native Seed Search was born 41 years ago in 1983. The organization spent the first 20 years collecting seed. So traveling across the US Southwest into Mexico and collecting a lot of the seed. For the last 20 years, the organization has focused on stewardship. So growing the seed, regenerating the seed, caretaking, and sharing the seed. Today, we have a seed bank, a seed lab, a conservation garden, an online store, and we're focused on partnerships and making sure that these seed are not just conserved in the seed bank, but that are conserved within communities. A little bit of information about the seed bank. It has 1,894 accessions, so those are different types of seeds collected from individuals in certain places. It represents 100 species. The majority are corn, beans, and squash. And as I mentioned, it represents the cultural heritage and farming knowledge of 50 Indigenous communities approximately. And it's about 75% of the collection. There are also representation from Latino or Hispanic farmers, from Mormon farmers. More than half is from Mexico. 90 of the accessions are domesticated. 9% are crop wild relatives. About 1% are wild plants unrelated to crops. And here's a website, adapts.nativeseeds.org, which is a database for the public to explore what's in the seed bank. This is a region that shows the accessions. So what's in the box is the area of focus, but you can see that there are collections throughout Mexico into Texas. And as I mentioned, the collection that's furthest south are from Guatemala. A little bit about the seeds, that they're open pollinated, non-GMO, no patents. So what we do, we grow and share these seeds, we regenerate them on a cycle. Because of the quantity, we are on about a 20-year cycle, but that depends on the variety, it depends on the popularity of a seed. So we are trying to have everything grown out on a 20-year cycle. We provide free seeds to individuals, community organizations, schools, farmers, and tribes, and prioritize communities that have historical and cultural ties and relationships with the seeds. We also provide resources. Andrea will talk more about our outreach. And we run an online retail store that includes seeds from the collection and then seeds that are not from the collection, as well as crafts, food products, art. This is our office, our conservation center. So we have several gardens. We've just added one over there on the right-hand side, top right. And that's where the seed bank and our offices are Seed distribution, Andrea will go into a little more about our partnerships. But on a yearly basis, we distribute 93,000 seeds, and close to 20,000 are provided through free seed access programs. A large amount go to community organizations, as I mentioned. Sawmilling, beautiful, awesome yellow watermelon. I think we've talked a little bit about the threats to traditional seeds. These are threats that still exist today. This is why having this conversation and talking about protection of seed and conservation is important. Key threats include seed contamination. This is something that we have spoken with our partners in Mexico, that, for example, they have tested seed and there are traces of GMO and some hybrid seed. So that can happen inadvertently because of cross-pollination. There's loss of seed sovereignty as a result of legal frameworks that go into a community and that prevent the community from accessing their seed. There's market pressure, so the pressure from industrial farming and the pushing of certain seeds, availability of seeds. Andrea has a very interesting story from Belize. She's gone there twice with the Traditional Native American Farmers Association. Belize has lost a lot of their traditional seed, and then the seed that is available to farmers is hybrid seed. So that's an example of both loss of seed sovereignty and also market pressure. Climate change, I think Bobby gave some excellent examples about pests, changing of planting times. You know, there's a lot of things we're seeing, less water. So there are a lot of examples of how climate change is affecting planting all over the world. Land use changes. With land use changes, for example, can affect pollinators and plants that help with pollination, for example. And then there's also neglect of seed. Okay, so developing the native seed search policy, we started during the COVID-19 pandemic. There was a huge demand for seed. And as an organization, we were very concerned about seed running out. It was a time where we were not growing and we were providing a lot of seed, and we realized that there needed to be a stronger policy in order to make sure that the communities that had relationships with the seed were prioritized for access. We had to clarify how the seeds were stewarded and especially how they were shared. And the most difficult parts of the seed policy to develop were about sharing the seeds, changing policies around that, and how to engage Indigenous stakeholders with transparency, with consultation, and incorporate organizational accountability. So at a small nonprofit, that's always a concern, is how do you ensure that the organization continues to fulfill its obligation after people leave? How do you create consistency, long-term consistency that continues along with an organization, irrespective of the people that come and go? So the process took a year, and it involved staff and the board of directors. It involved mostly the Native board of directors, the Native individuals on the board of directors, and then individuals from outside the organization as well that reviewed the document. It prompted, in terms of the organizational accountability, we realized that some of these really important decisions about the seed, for example, about returning seeds that NSS stewards large amounts of seed, that those decisions, individuals that are represented, so individuals from tribes that are represented in the seed collection needed to be in making those decisions. And they always needed to be. So that prompted a change in the organizational bylaws to ensure that that representation was there. And an example of, sometimes it's accepting seeds. So we had an example from a couple of years ago of a person that had traditional seeds, and he was in Mesa, and he had received the seeds from a farmer in Utah. And the story is that farmer in Utah had received them from some kids, this is 30 or 40 years ago, who had been in a cave and had found the seeds. So this is the type of question that is not straightforward, and that the organization brought it to the Seed Policy Committee, which are the Native members of our board, to think about that decision. And it was made over 6 months. We had to verify the story. We talked to other seed savers, and there was concern about the seed and not losing the seed, but what the responsibility was of the organization in accepting those seeds. So those are the type of questions that, that's an example of why representation on the board is so important. So we made informal practices, things that the organization had done informally, formalized. We articulated clear process for seed rematriation, seed restrictions. So certain seeds that are only available, for example, that are not available for sale. So we now have native access, which is our seeds that are not available for sale on the online store. They're only available through seed access programs. And define more clearly how the organization should kind of consult with tribes. The document, we don't want the document to be something that doesn't change. We do want input. We've already updated it once, so it shouldn't be a static document. It's intended to be used for consultation, to build trust, and to make sure that there's common understanding. It's intended to create more representation at Native Seed Search. And it also guides some of our grant funding to make sure that when we're going after grants, that is for community strengthening of seed saving. Thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Andrea, Dr. Andrea Carter.
Well, I'm so happy to be here today and to see some familiar faces and new faces for this interesting conversation. The point of this conference was really to have a space and a time to talk about what is going on with seeds and what are the threats to seeds, to educate ourselves so we as gardeners or farmers or consumers can make educated choices through what we grow, what we eat, what we purchase. So my talk today is going to be on challenges and opportunities in Southwest seed stewardship. So we've heard from two farmers, right, two growers. We've heard from the executive director of Native Seeds, someone whose role is the stewardship of some of the traditional seeds that farmers like Sterling, like Mr. Stone, are stewarding. And then we're going to hear from two researchers, right, who are working in this field of seed patents, of policies and laws governing what happens to the seeds that farmers steward in the international and economic structures that we operate in. Okay, but first, let's shake our hands high up in the air like we're growing to the sun, like a seed. All right, here we go. Everyone get a little energized. Thank you. I know. Okay, so today I'm going to talk with kind of two hats on. One of those is as a farmer, myself. So I operate Luna de Sonora Farm with my husband in 3 Points, Arizona. We're about 2 years in. We just moved to a larger field, and so what I'll share is part of my experience as a farmer and those challenges and opportunities of growing seed. And I'll also talk as my role as the Director of Agriculture and Education at Native Seed Search. So, to start out, a little bit about me. My mother's from North Africa, from Tunisia. And what I'm showing are some of the traditional water harvesting systems that are used there. It's an arid landscape. It's like southwest, what is that, southern Arizona. That looks pretty familiar. So I grew up spending time there. And what I saw is that there are traditional ways of growing in arid environments. They're ways that people have been farming for hundreds, if not thousands of years, in harmony with the particular landscape that they operate in. That's what brought me to Arizona. How similar? Traditional farming systems in arid landscapes that have allowed people to thrive through working in harmony with that environment that they're in, right? So we've got the Akchin farming that Sterling spoke of. We've got Dene farming. This is at the base of Canyon de Chelly, right? Using the water that goes through the canyon to grow corn. For hundreds of years, that's been going on. And then Hopi dryland farming in northern Arizona. So it's two things are going on in these situations with these traditional farming systems. It's both working with the land in a particular way, in a harmonious way, but also it's working with the plants, right? Adapting the seeds to grow in the particular conditions of that place. So let's think about maize. They say domesticated, it started in central Mexico, but boy, it's grown all the way up in Canada, down to Argentina. How is that occurring? It's through seed saving, right? Through farmers, through generations, growing and adapting seeds to the particular conditions of their place. That's how we get all this diversity. Chapalote corn is one of the older corn varieties of popcorn or used for canola maize. Right? But again, all through North, South America, people, farmers, indigenous communities adapting seed to their place. Here are just some, these are 59 different maize varieties from Mexico. Just a sampling of that beautiful diversity that again is the product of indigenous stewardship. Here's some cool beans. One of the greatest things I've learned from Native Seed Search is just that diversity. It's humbling. You go to the grocery store, you don't see that. So just to be exposed when you walk in the seed bank, say, oh my gosh, so many colors, so many flavors, so many cultures. So much intelligence represented in those varieties. Alexandra shared this. Right? Why are we all here today? Why does Native Seeds exist? It's because of this loss of that diversity, which was a major concern. And this is post-colonial. Right? This is 1900s. Just your average backyard farmer. Most people, no matter your background, their grandparents grew food. Well, they could access all these different varieties. And you saw this erosion, this loss. So we'll talk a little bit, how did we get here? Because that's always important to know how we move forward, right? Knowing our past. So this photo is showing the Santa Cruz River flowing in the early 1900s. That's a lot of water. That level of water is what supported a thriving traditional agriculture system. This really blew my mind when I learned about it. They did a study kind of evaluating how much food was once grown traditionally. So this was of the Tohono, 1.8 million pounds of beans, 300,000 pounds of corn. That's a lot of food. To support a population at that time of 6,000, distance grown, but still, that's so impressive. People come out to the desert and they think, oh, how do people live out here? It's there, it's dry, it's arid. It wasn't like that always. The landscape has dramatically changed. And so you once had this extremely thriving agricultural system that was rooted in a thriving waterway system. So we can't talk about how we got here in the Southwest or seed stewardship without the water question. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that when it's the challenges of seed stewardship or the challenges around water. It's a story of water loss and changes. So here's some of the river systems, right, of Arizona. That's a good amount of rivers flowing through. So it's estimated from the Park Service at the beginning of the 20th century, the water table was only about 15 to 20 feet below the surface of the ground. Hey, you could dig a hole 20 feet deep and find water. Now by the 21st century, in parts of Phoenix, even Tucson, we're at 700 feet, depending where you are. So again, a dramatic change to landscape. Now, how did this occur? You had settler colonialism. You had people coming through and landscapes dramatically changing as a result. Water getting diverted to new cities, to new communities. So here's dams that got built all through those river systems. That's going to dramatically change your agriculture. You dramatically change your waterways. One of those rivers, the Gila River, we had the Coolidge Dam built. We have the honor of listening to Mr. Stone today, talking about his childhood and growing up with that farming. His community, amongst others, experienced dramatic changes because of the damming of the rivers that their communities were dependent on. So you had periods of starvation, not that long ago, that are rooted in the changing of waterways. Well, if you can't farm because the water system changed, then you can't grow the seed of your people and you can't save that seed. So this is the context of how we kind of got here. The same as in New Mexico. We have a lot of seeds at Native Seed Search that we stored from up in New Mexico. This is Cochise Dam. That was finished in 1975. What happened with the building of this dam, because they wanted water for Albuquerque, Santa Fe, new Southwest cities that were getting more populated, the dam created a situation where the fields got inundated, saturated with water, because the water built up on the other side of the dam. So now their fields and sacred sites were getting flooded. This is Army Corps of Engineers. So now communities that have been farming for thousands of years can no longer farm in those fields because of changes to water. Because of government policies. It said, well, this is what we need to do. So that's where that graph, right? Where does that erosion come from? That's part of this 75% loss of agricultural diversity. It didn't just poof and disappear. There were reasons. Political, structural, social reasons that led to this loss. The problem with that loss is you lose seeds adapted to thrive in specific regions, right? So you've got the Punta Bando tomato from Baja California. It's hot in Baja California. It's a hot summer. This tomato's from there. What's everyone growing? The beefsteak tomato. These varieties need more water, right? They were bred in the Midwest. I don't know how many gardeners I've talked to say, oh, I can't farm, I can't garden. So what are you growing? Beefsteak tomato. No, you gotta try the Punta Bando. So again, that if you lose the varieties of the place, the farming becomes more challenging. So, okay, let's fast forward a little bit. So that was showing the 1900s, right? By the 1900s, we lost all this crop diversity. Further things that contributed to why we lost our traditional varieties. We had a movement promoting the adoption of modern cultivars. So this is pre-genetic modification. This is just breeding programs at international institutions and universities to breed for higher yielding varieties, right? To introduce new varieties that could do super well, especially with new fertilizers that were coming out of World War II. New chemical agriculture got introduced. So you got new high-yielding varieties, chemicals to put in your soil. So everyone's now growing these varieties, right? Abandoning the traditional variety. Then you've got the hybrids introduced. Who's heard of that term? Hybrid seed, right? Sometimes you see it in the seed catalog. There are hybrid tomatoes, all sorts of different kinds, but hybrid corn really changed the game. So a hybrid is basically just the crossing of two inbred lines. You've got two traits you like, you cross them, and the child of that cross is like a super corn, right? It's got all the traits you want in it, and it's high yielding. Well, this changed the game of agriculture in the US because by the 1930s, they were commercially available, and within 30 years, about 95% of US corn was hybrid. So everyone started growing these varieties, getting higher yields, and everyone's making a living. So again, there were these structural reasons and economic forces, changes in the seed industry and in agriculture that resulted in this. Then we got the GMOs came in. So in the 70s, that's when they first discovered or started releasing GMO crops. Some of that research started coming out. So you had recombination, where you could join the DNA of different species. This was never possible before. Even in the modern breeding or the hybrid, it's still corn with corn, right? Tomato and a tomato. But now you could put bacteria genes into the corn, right? You could put salmon genes. That was the first one, the flavor saver tomato, right? That was a salmon gene for cold tolerance they put into a tomato. This was never possible before. So you have new technologies introduced into agriculture, into the seed industry. Synthetic DNA, you could just make new DNA. Insert that into plants. So all these are dramatic changes in an agricultural system that for thousands of years you can never do anything like this. So what this graph is showing is that by 2020, 55% of the total harvested cropland in the US is being grown in at least one, in a variety that's a GMO variety. So again, a dramatic change to our seed industry, to the seeds we plant. Now, the impact of this is something that the following speakers will get more into, but the introduction of these new technologies into the seed industry result in these restrictions and patents. Right, because now it's a technology, it's a thing that you trademark, it's something that you've created, so you're gonna make money from it, royalties. And those restrictions really changed the game when it came to seed saving. So, in a big way, these plant variety protections or utility patents in particular. Because a company can say, well, we've created a new thing, right? It's our technology. We're basically giving you the right to use it for the season, but we own it. So, for example, a variety with a utility patent can only be saved for crop production, and often cannot be used for seed saving to resell, give away, or replant. So there's thousands of years of seed saving out the window. They're saying, no, you can't do that. So from my personal experience, sometimes these things are abstract, and you think, okay, well, that's going on, but I'm not a big commercial grower. I'm on like half an acre, Now we're on 2. This doesn't really impact me, and I'm not growing GMO crops, so it's okay. Well, I bought a bag of barley seed from Barclay Seed. This is a variety called solar barley, and it's a drought-tolerant variety. You only need to irrigate it once or twice, a few times. So it's a great cover crop. So I said, okay, I'm gonna buy some. Well, first I noticed it was treated seed. That's why it's pink. Barley's not usually pink. So there's that. But when I looked closer, it had a PVP notice on it, plant variety protection, which basically said that prohibits the sale or transfer of this variety for seed purposes. Now, I wasn't intending to sell this seed, but it shook me for a moment. I said, oh man, what if I wanted to? Or what if I wanted to share it with my neighbor? Where I farm, there's a few other farms nearby. You know, and so then it became real very quickly of what the reality of this legal framework can mean even for the small farmer. You know, again, just restrictions around the act of doing what farmers have always done, grown and shared and save seed. So like I said, it was treated seed. That's not great, with a fungicide. But what I also noticed is it said Bayer crop science on the bottom. So I thought I was buying from this company based out of Yuma, Arizona. But go figure, it's owned by Bayer. And so another theme that's occurred in our seed industry that changes or affects our reality as a farmer, as a consumer, is the consolidation of the seed industry that's occurred. So you think you're buying from a local company or an independent company, you go back and find out, wait, they're all owned by one another. So you had, for a while, the big six, Monsanto, DuPont, Syngenta, Bayer, Dow, and BASF, owning the vast majority of the seed industry, right? Owning all these other little companies. In 2018, Bayer purchased Monsanto. So all that top of the graph is one. So the reality of that is limiting options. I couldn't find untreated seed of that variety. So what does this mean in the context of traditional and indigenous seed stewardship? I often ask this question, what is a seed, in our workshops? We've been doing a lot of really nice indigenous garden leader workshops, working with tribal communities to support their seed saving, their seed banking. So this question comes up. And the answers are always so beautiful. The future, the past, our stories, ancestors, ceremonies, life, hope, our children. So I'm thinking about this. You're patenting, you're putting restrictions on these. And that's the fundamental issue. I think why there's so much passion around this issue, why this is a great concern to particularly indigenous seed stewards and communities, is this is the relationship that is held with those seeds. And so thinking of, well, what is seed sovereignty? I was, trying to reflect before this conference. And what I settled on was, it's the right of the seed itself, as our child, as our ancestor, to form a relationship with whomever, wherever. As a living entity. So to move away from it as a legal or just a botanical thing, but as relational, as a relative. And so bringing that weight to this idea of restricting that seed, patenting that seed, saying you can only use it once. Now on a good note, okay, so let's switch to opportunities. These are some of the partner farmers I've had the honor of working with through our seed grow outs, through our seed exchanges. Folks who are motivated to steward the seeds of their community. Some who grew up doing this, some who didn't. But we're all saying this is important and putting the time into that. So I'll end on this, which are, what are some of those opportunities? Okay, the previous speakers will talk about some of these challenges, or the following speakers about some of the challenges in the legal lens, but on on a human level, as an individual, as a community, what is going on, what can we do about this? And what I see that is a big opportunity is Arizona right now is the highest number of native owned and operated farms in the country. So what it says to me is that this trend of stewardship, of getting back into agriculture is happening. That's why you're all here today. People, you're interested in this. Maybe you're growing, maybe you want to grow. We also have the highest number of native women farmers. Right on. And moreover, what's going to come out in the next census, because they're going to release next year the results of the 22 census, but I got a tip off that the number of young native farmers is increasing. I said, well, this is good. Okay, things are happening. And what that means is I think that people are, the more people farming, the more people involved in control of their own seeds. But it takes people growing and saving and sharing a really active agricultural system for that to happen. Another opportunity I'm seeing is the funding opportunities and priorities are shifting. And the USDA is saying, we want to see projects that are supporting Indigenous agricultural practices. And my hope is that connection is happening to the farmers, right? So we're supporting more of the seed stewardship. With Deb Holland in the Department of the Interior, I saw a grant and they said, we're prioritizing projects that implement traditional ecological knowledge in their land restoration. This hasn't happened before. This isn't language of the US government, but it's changing. It's taken time. It's not the only solution, but it's a step in the right direction to see that money funneled to Indigenous stewardship practices and that being prioritized and respected. Networks of seed exchange, with more people farming, more people sharing seeds, right? Making sure seeds are in the hands of growers and of one another, that they're in the communities they're from. And lastly, through that, the connecting with and adapting traditions. Mr. Stone said something very lovely of, you were proud about a thing you learned because your father had taught you. Not everyone has that privilege because of the gaps in not growing, right? Because communities got separated from land. My grandmother farmed, but my mother didn't. And so there wasn't the continuation of knowledge sharing. We're lucky today to have Mr. Clifford Pablo with us, who's taught many people. It's very important to have that, who's taught me when I'm looking to share something. To have the people in our community who can still share, and the people who are willing to learn. That's where I see a lot of hope. And through young people kind of adapting traditions, wanting to learn, but also working with what we can today. Thank you.
I'm going to introduce the next two speakers. Dr. Brad Sherman is the University of Queensland Laureate Professor and member of the ARC Centre for Plant Success at the University of Queensland, Australia, where he researches on intellectual property. He's currently working on a history of intellectual property in the citrus industry in California and Arizona. Dr. Allison Fish, School of Law, University of Queensland. She is a senior lecturer in law and senior research fellow at the Centre for Policy Futures at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. Allison's research focuses on the use of law and technology to manage intangible cultural heritage in India and Australia. Thank you both.
The idea of this session is really just to provide some basic information to set the framework for a conversation. And I know that Allison is following up after me. We'll be thinking about one of the potential solutions to deal with the problems in order to ensure that groups, farmers can continue with their traditional practices. So I will provide an overview of intellectual property protection for France, and Andrea has done some of my job when we're ready. Thank you. And then I'm going to talk about the international regulation of plants. And it's a very complex, confusing national arrangement, and it's only getting worse. So I apologise in advance. I'll try and make it straightforward as I can. Okay, so I focused today on 3 forms of intellectual property protection. There are others, and trademarks, which Allison will talk about, and Andrea mentioned. I'm not going to really talk about it. It focuses on the name rather than the plant. We focus on the plant. So the first I'm going to talk about is the 1930 plant patent, uniquely an American invention. It was replicated in South Africa and Cuba, but not really anywhere else in the world. Then the 1970 plant variety protection, which is adopted in most countries. Similar law is adopted in most countries around the world in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then thirdly, you're looking at utility patent protection, or sometimes we do to say patent protection. And although it's existed since the US was formed as a nation, it really only took off for plants in the 1980s. So the 1930 Plant Act provides 20-year protection for anyone who discovers or invents asexually reproduces, and it's specifically just for situations where people take a cutting from a plant and reproduce it, and it has to be a new and distinct variety of plant. In the 1930s, the skills and expertise of lawyers dealing with plants was crude, to say the least, and in most cases, the protection was granted for on the basis of pictures. This is a patent for an orange Californian discovered it on his farm. And one of the things about the plant patent protection is it would recognise if somebody would go into the field and there was a mutation that occurred, somebody recognised the protection, and that's what this was, the Robinson orange, which apparently wasn't very good, didn't taste very good, so it wasn't used for very long at all. But it's an example. And this is all the patent really existed of. It's a picture of the plant, or the fruit, whatever it was, and a very brief description. It basically says, I hereby claim the picture, and they're beautiful. They're beautiful pictures. The next form of protection was the 1970 plant variety protection. Plant variety protection, or plant patent protection, or sorry, plant variety protection. It's sometimes known differently, plant rights in some countries. It is a specific form of protection that protects not only the asexual reproduced plants, but also sexually reproduced plants. It applies to seeds, tubers, and asexually reproduced plants, so it's much broader than the 1930 Plant Patent Act. The United States, like many countries, Australia, many developing countries and very developed countries, adopted this law in the 70s. It was a time when federal governments were introducing user pays. Prior to this, most of the agricultural development was done by state-funded agencies. It was decided that farmers should not get their seed for free. They should be given out by the US Department of Agriculture, University of Arizona Extension Station, but they should use intellectual property protection in the form of this plant variety protection and then try and recoup some money. It hasn't really worked. That was the goal behind it was set up. Protection is granted for varieties, and there are a number of criteria. One is it must be novel, and it has the definition there. It's not novel, it's completely new. It's not sold or otherwise propagated for a 1 year period. The other criteria which is quite important, particularly for the sort of seed that native seed deals with, is it also must be distinct, uniform and stable. One of the reasons why sexually reproduced plants were not protected in the 1930s because plants or seeds will change the character over generations. It was decided it was not fair to allow people to take out a property right on something you didn't really know what was the same. Like if something changed from one generation to the next, was that person who grew the orange that was similar to, different to the Robinson orange, required to take that protection? By the 1970s, it was decided that agronomy and the science had developed enough that they could stabilise things. And so long as somebody could show that their plant was distinct with those criteria. One of the things about this law and the plant variety law, it focused on the external phenotypical aspects of a plant, the shape, the external trait. Sometimes they got the characteristics like drought resistance and salinity resistance, but most of the time it was the external trait, the way it looked, like the picture of the orange. It had to be uniform, so it had to be something that when you grew it out, it was the same. And also had to be stable. It had to, as crops grew, as generations passed on, they had to remain the same. And it's one of the characteristics of property in general. One of the features of this law, the two features of this law which are important, one is there's a breeder's exemption. And basically that means if somebody has a plant variety protection, somebody else can breed from a plant that is protected by plant variety protection. It's for this reason that most of the big seed companies don't like plant variety protection. They take out either plant patents or patent protection. Second thing is, as Andrea mentioned, there is limited capacity for on-farm saving seed, but in many cases this can be restricted by contract. So we'll talk about that in a moment. The third type of protection is utility patent protection, or this is sometimes just known as patent protection. This is the strongest form of protection by far. It protects any use in virtually any capacity of whatever is protected for a 20-year period. Criteria for protection there, it has to qualify as subject matter. From the 1980s, it's become clear that genes, traits, methods, plant varieties or varieties themselves, and now groups of plants. And groups of plants are not even taxonomically connected. So a lot of the glyphosate Roundup Ready plants, it's not like it's for these taxonomically related plants, it's just plants that they think are valuable economically. So they're really odd collections of plants. So the utility patent protection has increased dramatically since the 1980s, and the large agro sort of pharma biotech companies, it's their preferred form of protection. There's also been a huge amount of development in relation to genes or sort of patents on traits that are developed from the sort of sub-level. Many of these plants now are no longer classified as GMO because of the technologies that are being used to develop them. So it's getting harder and harder to recognise them and identify what they are. So these are the three main forms of protection. Without a doubt, utility patent protection is the strongest. There's a research exemption that's very narrow. There's no capacity to save seed. So if someone has something, a patent over a seed or a trait, there's virtually nothing that anybody can do other than take out a license. I want to shift now to focus on the international legal arrangements. The law in this area is changing, and it's changing rapidly in the last couple of years. There's been sort of a shift in a number of areas. I'll talk about that in a moment. This is just a fairly crude history, an overview of the relevant international treaties. So historically, it was open access. There was no restrictions on access to plants and genetic resources, and this was eventually known as the principle that was formally named in international law in 1983 as the principle of common heritage of humankind. Basically what this meant is that people from Q carters could go wherever they want in the world and steal whatever they want and take it back and grow it. It was the thing that facilitated the movement and taking of plants from one place to the other. There are many positive things about the movement of plants, but there are also many negative things. One of the consequences in the 1990s, developing countries starting to push back against developed countries getting stronger intellectual property protection, stronger trade arrangements, was they started to say this previous history of 300 years of colonisation, where the sort of northern countries' agricultural basis has been built on plants that have been taken from the south, we want some sort of compensation for them. In 1993, the Convention on Biological Diversity was passed. It had a number of different names. There was One important part of which has really been lost was about conservation of biological diversity, and that's really been cited. A second part of it was about access and benefit sharing. In 2010, the Nagoya Protocol was introduced, which is sort of an addendum to the United Nations sort of Convention on Biological Diversity. I'll come back and talk about that in a moment. In 2001, the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, which is administered by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, it's called the Plant Treaty, was introduced. It was built on a very different notion than the Convention on Biological Diversity. I'll come to that in a moment. So the key features of the CBD and the Nagoya Protocol. Firstly, there's 168 signatories to the CBD and Nagoya. The United States is not a member, but Mexico is. Australia is a signatory, but we haven't implemented it yet. So you have lots of variations between different countries. The CBD in Nagoya is based upon the idea of a bilateral contract. And basically what this says is that if someone collects seed from somebody, they have to have, the person who's giving the seed must have prior informed consent about what you're going to do when you collect the seed, what it's going to be used for, and then you have to enter into a benefit sharing arrangement with the person providing the seed. That benefit sharing arrangement should provide benefits, either monetary or non-monetary. Monetary, it's relatively straightforward. Non-monetary might include the sort of thing that Navy Seed does, the conservation and stewardship and distribution of that seed, education, facilities, technology transfer, those sort of things. One of the other notable things about the Nagoya Protocol is expressly encourages the recognition of Indigenous rights and interests. It hasn't really been implemented at all. Queensland and Australia, we've got sort of a law that sort of nods at this, but really has no ramifications. The European Union's done nothing. Most of the countries haven't really, most of the countries that should have done something haven't done anything yet. And it's the countries that are most at stake that have implemented these provisions. One of the interesting things about the Nagoya Protocol, and one of the most powerful things about the Nagoya Protocol, is it does not just apply to things that happen in country. So, for example, if someone in Arizona is working on plant genetic resources and they want to ship it to Australia or ship it to Europe, in Europe, in theory at least, the customs agents will ask, have you collected that plant in a Nagoya compliant fashion? So Nagoya compliance is in relation to the use of the genetic resource, not in relation to access to that resource. So what it means is what happens here in the United States, although it doesn't matter if you're only working in the United States, it does matter though if you want to export it to one of the 168 countries and the numbers are growing rapidly. So basically what's happened now is that many institutions in Australia and in the United States and in Canada, which neither of those countries have adopted it, they've already attempted to become Nagoya compliant. The University of California a decade ago decided it was going to be Nagoya compliant. So somebody in Queensland who wanted to send some wild sorghum that was collected for analysis in California got a letter back saying, we'll only undertake research on this Australian-based wild sorghum if you can show it was collected in a Nagoya compliant fashion. So it's a law that's having ramifications. So although the United States is not a signatory, it is important in the United States. It's important for native seed and it's important for collections. There are many problems with Nagoya, but we can talk about those. The Plant Treaty is the other large international treaty that exists. There are 151 member states. United States became a member in 2017. Mexico is not a member, and I'll explain why that is in a moment. There are a number of key features about the Plant Treaty that are really important to note. The first is it's based on the system, it's a multilateral system. So unlike the the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Nagoya Protocol, which is a bilateral relation. It's sort of like a privatisation. It's a private contract between myself and the person I collect the seed from. This treaty is based on the idea that it's a multilateral system. So it's based on a fairly simple idea that in relation to the plants which are listed in Annex 1 of the treaty, at least there's 64 plant species that were deemed to be important at the time, and the number has grown now quite a bit. For any of those plants which are put into the multilateral system, the person putting the plant into the multilateral system must do so under a standard material transfer agreement. That standard material transfer agreement has a number of key terms in it. Firstly, it's not negotiable. In the arrangement, the story I gave you before about the wild sorghum at the University of California, the researchers sent the SMTA to the people in California and said, wild sorghum is one of the 64 plants, it's an exemption from the CBD, it should be covered by the plant treaty. The lawyer came back and said, we want to negotiate the terms of the international standard material transfer agreement. The researcher could write back and say, one of the conditions of the SMTA is you can't negotiate the terms. You can't change them. Secondly, access to the utilisation and conservation, breeding and training is only for food and agriculture. So it doesn't apply to cosmetics, nutraceuticals, pharmaceuticals. Those industries have historically dominated the access and benefit arrangement to the detriment of food and agriculture. The United Nations FAO is, at the moment, there's a pushback, a subtle pushback, but a pushback, which is pushing towards the FAO. Another key feature of the plant treaty is intellectual property rights. If you receive material, you cannot take out intellectual property rights on that material. So you're forbidden from taking it. If you change it, you can, and so the question then becomes, how much you have to change something you receive from the international, under this treaty to change it. And it becomes quite a complicated thing, but at least it's something that protects provisions. And it either includes materials, new materials in the system, or shares benefits. The multilateral system, which is the area of law which is the preferred option now for the food and agriculture and in many different countries, hasn't really worked. Neither has Nagoya. I think the whole system really is flawed in many different ways. Although there are some important aspects about it. Today, only very few countries have included material, and it's mainly been national collections. So the US Department of Agriculture has put its collection in. The CPR centres like CIMMIT, CARTA, these are the 13 research centres around the world that collect in relation to certain crops. And the World Vegetable Centre, and there's a few others. So there's very little participation by other organisations. The next thing is that one of the things that happens with one of the ways in which benefits are meant to be shared under this multilateral system is that when somebody receives material from the multilateral, so in Australia, 98% of our broadacre crops come from CIMMIT, so the CGR centre in Mexico, all our wheat and barley and stuff like that. We are meant to, any profit that arises, from use of that material, there's meant to be a percentage which is at 0.01%, it's listed in the SMTA, is meant to go back into a plant trust fund, which is redistributed back to member states or to projects or organisations that want to do work. One of the things about is that they pay a portion. The last time I looked, there's been about $400 million received under the multilateral system. But about $396 million of that has been voluntarily contributed by governments. The Dutch government, the Australian government, and a couple others. The Dutch have put in the lion's share of that money. In terms of the payment, there's been 3 payments, as far as I know, made under the multilateral system. So despite the fact that there's been millions of plants transferred, people are saying we've only made money in 3 cases. One was a Dutch organisation that put in $3,000. Another one was a Canadian company, and then the University of Queensland put in $208.82. I don't know, I have no idea what it was for, and I imagine they spent $5,000 in lawyers' fees putting together that $208. Anyway, but the upshot of this is that the multilateral system is not working. There's no benefits going back. What is working is that plants are being distributed. There's no doubt about it. There's millions and millions of plants being distributed around the world. But there has been a pushback particularly by private organisations. Private organisations now, under the Standard Material Transfer Agreement, when you receive material and you want to take out intellectual property protection, you have to pay something back. When you receive material under the multilateral system, you have to keep record keeping, and you have to pay a percentage of the profits, in theory at least, even when it's crossed with other things. There's no limit really in terms of what percentage, and there's no clear way of knowing how much and when crossing something disappears and ends and your obligation is finished. A number of breeders that I've spoken to over the last couple of years in many different countries have said that multinational, sort of the Bayers and all those organisations, are now refusing to deal with any material under the multilateral system. My understanding is that in 2015, when the United States expressed its intention to join the multilateral system, most of the large agri-pharma biotech companies collected huge amounts of material. I don't know whether it was from native seed, but certainly from the US Department of Agriculture, and they're only working on material that is collected and they have collected so they can avoid that process. Anyway, so that's really a separate issue. There is at the moment a whole range of other issues at stake. One issue is about the status of sequence information. So if somebody collects corn and then does genomic sequencing on that corn, and then shares that sequence information, is that genetic information, is that data, digital, is that something that is part of the seed or is it separate? And should that person be obliged to comply with the rules of the international community? There's a meeting in China in September last year, there's one coming up fairly soon. Basically, countries like Australia, Japan, Europe, America and Canada are saying no. All the countries that are having stuff taken, Mexico, Brazil, Queensland, which in some ways not part of Australia, is saying yes. It depends on whether you're a giver of material or whether you're a user of material, and the world has been really divided. At the last meeting of the parties of the Plant Treaty, it was decided that they would move away from the multilateral system, this is the plan, and go on the basis of the user. It's unclear what format it's going to be, a subscription basis. So Australia can subscribe to the multilateral system if the government pays a percentage of seed sales or something like that. And that will extend to include digital sequence information. But at this stage, the law as it is, and that's quite clear. So I think that there's a number of different issues that arise, and this is really the point of what I wanted to talk about today, or to start the conversation. What are the issues? How to prevent biopiracy? Now, I know that Native Seed already has a standard material transfer agreement, which is a contract that is used to distribute. That's a technique that's used. There is labelling on the packet, which is a move in the right direction. But there are other things. How do you stop somebody from taking out a packet of material? And Allison will be talking about one technique that's been adopted, derived from India, and is relevant here. What to do about Nagoya? Nagoya is incredibly problematic. Researchers are pushing back around the world. Queensland was one of the first jurisdictions in the world to adopt the Convention on Biodiversity. There's been 12 contracts in 24 years, all by the university I'm with, all by 2 people. collecting wild rice, and then wild rice is not covered by the agreement. It hasn't worked. Huge amounts of money has been spent on academics, policymakers, lawyers. Nothing's gone back to conservation. There's a really big groundswell amongst a whole lot of different people that something needs to be done to deal with it. However, there are many things about Nagoya which are really good. Need to, like the recognition of the role that communities have played in stewarding seed over generations and how that can be respected. There are many important provisions about benefit sharing and making sure that things are given back. And I think that many of these, for example, the AUC does already embodies those things, just needs some tweaking in terms of language. What about the multilateral system? What would be the advantage of putting stuff into, I'm not suggesting this at all, but should an ADC put all its stuff into the multilateral system? What does that mean? It will basically mean that someone in Norway could do what they want, and then it would disappear. But these are issues now that the United States is a part of the multilateral system that really need to be addressed. And the key thing is, what is at stake? One of the defences that exists in this provision is the idea that people have to value add to any material they get. So if you get some corn from native seed, you can't take a patent out of it. You have to breed it and develop it into something different. But the distance between something you derive and something that you can protect is fairly small. And it creates huge amounts of problems and difficulties going forward. There is a push at the international level to introduce the idea of disclosure of origin in all patent applications. What this means is basically, if I take out a patent on a new variety of corn, I would have to say in my application that I bred this corn from seed that I collected from such and such an organisation, and that then would lay the groundwork for someone, that organisation, to then identify whether there has been a difference, etc. going forward. It then places on the burden on small organisations. I read this morning that Bayer, whatever they're called this week, in their, I just tell Alexandra this one, they call it, they also use stewardship of their technology. So when farmers get their genetically modified barley, whatever it is, or their protected barley, you are stewards of that. But these are things, the role of contract. But these are things that really need to be addressed because issues that are changing out there. It's quite an opportune moment. The international regimes are changing and there is scope for things. And there is scope for organisations like Native Seeds Practice to be seen as, it's not as if Native Seed is behind. I think Native Seed in many ways is leading the way in terms of how it deals with these things. But there's a long way to go. I think there's some really interesting things that we will certainly take home with us back to Australia. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here today. My name is Allison and I'm from the University of Queensland. I want to start off by paying my respects, or acknowledging the traditional owners on the lands of which we meet, as well as where I work in Brisbane, and paying my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. While I'm from the University of Queensland, I'm currently living in Australia and working there. I also grew up here in Tucson, and my parents are from Galveston, Texas area and southern Michigan. They met in Phoenix, and then they moved down here where I grew up, and they both have themselves done research on traditional agricultural techniques in the Tucson Basin area, particularly around the Gila. So they really influenced how I think about people relationships from the time I was a little kid moving forward. So today what I'm going to be talking about is some work that I have done in India and how I see connections here around plant-people relationships in the Southwest, but also in Australia. And in India, what I looked at was some of the government initiatives on the use of online databases to protect and preserve cultural heritage around traditional medical knowledge. So not just seeds, but also ways in which those seeds were then included into medicinal compositions, as well as the stories around those, the ancient texts around those, and how those were included into databases, primarily to document what is called prior art in the law, or it's that prior knowledge that exists that would defeat certain legal requirements of a private patent claim. And this is in order to address concerns around biopiracy that was taking place in the 1980s and 1990s. So to talk about that, I want to talk a little bit around the concept of biopiracy and talk about some of the best known cases in the world of biopiracy, as well as one that's a little bit closer to home that involved a enola bean, which is a yellow bean that actually, or was derived from a yellow bean that actually comes from the southern Arizona area, actually northern Mexico, southern Arizona area. And then I want to talk about what are the problems that are presented in the way the law operates for preventing biopiracy, and then how the Indian nation state, the central government there, and different really influential figures in the Indian government and civil society sort of worked together and collaborated together to develop a larger project called the Traditional Knowledge Digital Library. And then try to think through with you and discuss a little bit about what are the implications then here in the Southwest around seed sovereignty, and would something like a database work? Would it be beneficial, and what that would mean and what it would take? So I don't know how many of you all have heard the term biopiracy. I might be treading old ground, it might be new ground. But the term was actually coined in the early 1990s by a man named Pat Mooney, who was working out of the Rural Advancement Federation International. But he was also a farmer interested in biodiversity, seed saving, sustainable agriculture, and things like that. And what Pat Mooney described with this term biopiracy, which has really sort of gotten a lot of attention around intellectual and cultural property discussions, is the use of intellectual property systems to legitimize the exclusive ownership and control of biological resources and their associated knowledge, traditional knowledge often is what it's called, without recognition, compensation, or protection for contributions from Indigenous and rural communities. And so what Pat Mooney was really noticing was sort of this extractive colonial relationship. He was saying this really parallels when you're talking about material resource extraction, like mining or taking agricultural goods out of, and that sort of settler colonial, political, social, and economic relationships and processes. And he said there's actually parallels to what's happening with cultural heritage and local knowledges as well. Around how to use biological resources and the importance of biological resources. And so he was making these parallels between dispossession of property and dispossession of knowledge through intellectual property claims. And he was also noticing that a lot of this happened, that private individuals and multinational companies were lodging these patent claims in places like the United States, the European Union, and then litigating on them and kind of bringing lawsuits that were often, or threatening to bring lawsuits against smallholder farmers, small business people, in a very threatening manner. And so there's issues associated with that. Like if you are a small farmer receive a notice in the mail saying, you violated my property interests, we're going to sue you if you don't cease and desist, that has a very chilling effect for a lot of people who don't really want to take that risk. Because going to court is expensive, it's emotionally difficult, it's time consuming, and you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So in what Pat Mooney was talking about in particular were a couple well-known examples of biopiracy from the 1980s and 1990s. And so you have one of these ones from the Amazonian basin, which is the use of ayahuasca for medicinal purposes by shamanic individuals within local communities there. And in 1986, a scientist here in the United States registered a patent claim for it. Eventually, the patent claim was contested in 2001. The U.S. Patent Tribunal Board rejected that original claim. However, the patent holder then appealed that and was actually able to recapture portions of that claim. So that took place between 1986 and 2005, so we're talking about huge expanses of time as well. Another well-known case, which I'll be talking about a little bit more, is an application in 1993 that was filed in the United States for the wound healing uses of turmeric paste, or powder that had been made into a paste. And that's actually a common treatment for any type of skin irritant in South and Southeast Asia. It's very well known. It was filed by two inventors of Indian expatriate origin working at the University of Mississippi. So I'll talk a little bit more about that case because that case is the direct inspiration for the online database that I'm going to talk about further. It was also similarly followed by a case involving a patent claims on a basmati rice genome made by a Texas company for called Rice Tech. And that patent claim was also eventually overturned, but it took years and cost the Indian government $1.5 million. But basmati, the rice stock, which a lot of you all might know is a very fragrant and aromatic rice, is originally from the Punjab region that lies between Pakistan and India. Similarly, again, India, another of these celebrated early cases of biopiracy was the use of neem oil for fungicidal properties. That one had less success in Indian attempts to contest it, and actually not all of the patents were re-examined. And then finally, there's other ones involving the Hoodia plant from South Africa, which had a patent applied to it in relation to its potential for weight loss. Additionally, Cabo from the Pacific, there was a patent application by L'Oreal for its use in preventing hair loss and things like that. And while we're mostly talking about patents when we're talking about biopiracy, I have seen trademark issues where important names, culturally significant names or sacred names are used by multinational corporations. And oftentimes, it isn't always the formal legal channels that cause a company to withdraw their intellectual property claim, but it's actually a lot of social pressure through activist networks. One of the better known early biopiracy cases that's close to home involves the Enola bean, which the patent was filed in the late 1990s, I believe it was 1996, by Partners LLC, Limited Liability Corporation. And then the listed inventor on that patent claim was a man named Larry Proctor, who in 1993 or 1994 had traveled to Sonora, Mexico, and bought a number of dried beans. He'd taken the yellow beans from those that he dried, and over the next 2 years, crossbred them 3 times with other stock to attain what he called a stable and distinct yellow variety that was also noted to absorb water more quickly and to cook in about half the time that other dried beans of its nature and similarity cook in. He named that bean Enola after his wife, and then he applied for a patent claim in 1996, which was granted in 1999. Then in 1999, later that year, he sued 2 import companies, which were importing beans from Mexico, the same yellow beans, and he also sued a number of small farmers in Colorado as well as elsewhere in the United States. I'm not sure, he might have threatened lawsuits, because that's not always documented in the public record. And what he asked was that people cease and desist from planting, selling yellow beans that were similar to his, and in violation of his Enola patent. It's estimated that average cost might have been at $100,000 for a defense against this. So you can see, again, it's this very chilling effect if you're sued or if you're threatened with a lawsuit. It also takes a lot of time. And most defendants, especially smallholders, are risk averse. So it does have that very chilling effect. What did happen eventually is that in 2000, the International Center for Tropical Agriculture in Colombia requested a re-examination of the Enola patent. So patents can be contested. You can say that new evidence has emerged, that there was prior art that the patent examiner didn't know about, but this is an expensive process and it's not perfect. But CIAT, a institution in Colombia, decided to push that re-examination forward and did so, saying that in fact Enola was similar to, and there was prior art evidence in this Azufrado peruana 87 bean, and that the patent had been improperly granted. So in 2008, 8 years after the re-examination was requested, and about halfway through the patent's life cycle, the U.S. Patent Trials, or an appeal board, did revoke the Enola patent. They did say that the prior art existed in that Azufrado peruana 87 bean. However, Podners then appealed to the Federal Court of Appeals in the United States. And that took another 3 years before the U.S. federal court found on a different issue that, in fact, the way in which Proctor, that original inventor, had developed the Enola bean was something that was obvious to a person skilled in the art, so that any experienced farmer would understand that crossbreeding over 3 generations might achieve this particular stable yellow bean. And so, as you can see there, that's an 11-year period, and that's also 12 years after the first lawsuit started. So farmers are having to live with this uncertainty over a 12-year period. So the lessons and concerns I take from the Enola patent is really the things that patent challenges, requests for re-examination, and defense against a potential lawsuit. They're expensive things. They cost a lot of money. It takes a long time, and even if you get an outcome you're happy with in the first instance, it can be appealed, and you may have to go back to court. And so there's an overall chilling effect on the use of plant and seed during that time period. So the emerging question for a lot of Indigenous and local communities and people who are invested in seed sovereignty and diverse plant-people relationships really was, is there a mechanism to sort of create a defensive strategy against these private claims? And that's what India was grappling with in particular. And the Indian response was, if the issue is really all about prior art and whether there's prior evidence out there, then could we do some sort of online database, whether it's a publicly accessible one, whether it's gated and restricted access to certain populations, can that actually provide a preventative and proactive solution to the issue of biopiracy? And that really came out of that Indian experience with those 3 cases of biopiracy involving neem, turmeric, and basmati rice. So when all of those patents, started to circulate in public knowledge in major newspapers or in activist networks around the world, the Indian government, and particularly 3 big agencies there and a huge swath of the civil society that's interested in sustainability. One of the key leading figures there is a woman named Vandana Shiva. You may have heard of her, I'm not sure. There's public outcry. And so, in particular, leaders from the Department of Industrial Protection and Policy, the Council on Scientific Industry and Research, and this other ministry called Ayush, or it's a ministry about Indian South Asian classical systems of medicine. And it was led by someone named B.K. Gupta, who's a computer scientist by training. And what they did is they found out that they decided to challenge the patent facts, and they did those by searching out in ancient South Asian texts, as well as in contemporary scientific resources, that prior art evidence. Then they had it translated, and they sent it to the United States Patent and Trademark Office so that the patents could be re-examined. And it's from that experience they realized sort of the extent of the issue of biopiracy was quite huge for South Asian plant-based knowledge. And so that's how they came upon this preventative strategy of the Traditional Knowledge Digital Library in 1999, and they actually implemented and started working on it in 2001. And in sort of designing the strategy about whether it's going to be a public online database or a gated access thing, they were advised by the World Intellectual Property Organization at the United Nations, and it's really become sort of a key program that White Code, this UN agency, advocates. But that being said, even though it was inspired by all these different instances of biopiracy, the template for how the database is designed and how it is meant to function really is around this turmeric patent challenge. And so turmeric, a lot of you guys might see it in the grocery store, you might use it in your cooking. Some of you guys might, go to coffee shops and there's a turmeric chai latte available. So it's the product of a flowering plant that's found throughout South and Southeast Asia. You take the rhizomatic root structure, you roast it, you turn it into a powder, which you can buy in spice markets throughout South Asia. And then it's often either mixed with other ingredients or as a paste for varied purposes. You can mix it with milk for to calm stomach if you have stomach problems. This is a picture of my roommate. He was getting married, and so it's common to use it as a sort of skin smoothing and lightening paste before to sort of beautify like a spa treatment at home. Or it can be used to calm things like eczema and things like that. So the turmeric patent challenge was really around this patent claim that was filed in 1993 by the University of Mississippi, along with its two listed inventors, which were clinical medical researchers at that university. They were both of South Asian origin, and they admit to knowing the well-known uses of it for wound healing purposes prior to their actual work on it. They went through several clinical tests to show the scientific efficacy, and then they filed for a patent through their university, which is a very typical arrangement in academia. And they said that they did this in later interviews with them because that is the way to popularize this treatment in the United States. So it's sort of this when in Rome, do as the Romans do. We want to popularize and publicize the antimicrobial benefits of turmeric, so we'll put a patent on it. So the patent was granted in 1995. The news spread around the world and provoked much outrage in India. So the group in the government formed that I mentioned earlier, led by B.K. Gupta, and they found that the major issue was that the prior art was available, it just wasn't accessible by patent examiners, who had very limited time to review patents. And in doing so, most of the reason it wasn't accessible is a lot of the prior art was available in South Asian languages like Urdu, and it wasn't physically accessible. So it wasn't physically or linguistically accessible because most of these texts were in South Asia, and the patents were being examined over in Washington, D.C. So there you see a certified English translation of the previous text. And this was one of the things that was submitted in the patent revocation proceedings. Now, eventually, and I believe it was 1999, the turmeric patent was revoked. The University of Mississippi first removed itself, and then it was actually formally revoked. Despite this, there were several issues with that. The first was that it cost the Indian government millions of dollars. India is a development state. That's actually quite a lot of money for India. Secondly was throughout the proceedings, the result of revocation or re-examination was uncertain, so there was no guarantee that they were going to get this outcome. And Related to that, India had what's called third-party standing. They weren't an official party. They didn't have rights before the U.S. Patent Tribunal Board. They could only request. It was actually India's sort of that political relationship between India and the U.S. that forced the issue forward and their participation in it. And then secondly, right after that, the Council for Science and Industrial Research did a study of the U.S. patent system, and they were estimating that there's around 2,000 instances of biopiracy every year within patents filed in the United States alone. So the issue was huge, and you couldn't go on a one case by one case basis. There needed to be a proactive strategy, and so that was the traditional knowledge digital library. And when I talked with V.K. Gupta, what he told me was in developing this strategy, he, quote, studied the patent system to understand the adequacies and inadequacies, and then he applied technology to fill the gaps. And that was the traditional knowledge digital library. And so the TKDL is an online database. It contains currently 4 South Asian medical systems. It has separate libraries and separate informational classification systems for each of those libraries. It's developed by practitioners within each of those fields of classical medicine, along with computer scientists, library scientists, etc. The contents are available in what they call the 5 international patent languages: Japanese, French, German, Spanish, English, and they also have it available in Hindi. It can be expanded, so in 2018, the Tibetan medical system Salaripa was included and a whole separate library was created. It can also be added to so that if there are limited resources, the government can pinpoint what they feel is most at threat and then add in other material at a later date as financial resources become available. And it articulates in terms of its information structure with the International Patent Classification System at WIPO. However, it isn't open to the general public. It's only there for patent examiners and patent offices that have signed an agreement with the Indian government, and it can only be used for patent examinations. And this is because also the Indian government would like to approach classical medicine as a perhaps promotable or economic resource for the country. That's just an examination of how the structure for Ayurveda, which is one of the systems, is in sort of a parallel conversation with the International Patent Classification System. And here you see Ayurvedic doctors and computer scientists at work and how they translate the knowledge into the database and into this classification structure. And this is the actual output. So what you can see here is a discussion of the traditional knowledge resource classification code, the international patent classification code it corresponds with, what the formulation or the remedy actually is, how it's used, how it's applied, and where is that prior art evidence, who's the author, when is it dated to, and the page number where you can find that knowledge. This is examples of that same page in different languages. And you can play around with the database online. There's a couple sample formulations there as well. Overall, the TKDL has had an impact on biopiracy in India. However, that impact is limited. It is not what I call self-executing. Patent examiners don't tend to just find it. Usually what it takes is someone who's working within the TKDL offices to watch patent applications being filed around the world, and then they send in the information to patent examiners and note, you already have access to this database. Please use this in your examination. Number of communities around the world, including Australia, is using the TKDL as a template, not just for medical knowledge, traditional medicine, but also for general plant-based knowledge and things like seeds. And one of the other things that's interesting is that the TKDL is always changing, it's always emerging, sort of like what Andrea was saying about native seed search policy, is that it's something that's continually being revisited. So So Salaripa was added in 2018, yoga was added in 2008, as well as potentially using the TKDL as a platform for commercial ventures with pharmaceutical companies. It's something that India has been exploring since 2022. So this is just an example of the impact on biopiracy. It's been used in about 340 patent re-examinations or revocations at different patent offices. It's also being incorporated in India's approach to the Nagoya Protocol, which Brad talked about. It is the only online resource that is being used that is that sort of, quote, associated knowledge with the plant or genetic resources that are protected by the Nagoya Protocol. But this is just important partly because India is one of the most advanced nations in the world in implementing the Nagoya Protocol. It's actually gotten it on the ground and they're monitoring and attempting to enforce it. And one of the ways they do that is by creating an online suite of databases and then trying to draw them together to monitor where biopiracy might be occurring. This is where you can see who has signed on to use the TKDL, which nation states around the world. And these are other projects that are similar to the TKDL that are using the TKDL as a template and where they're located in the world. So it has had influence. And I spoke a little bit about that. Those two things is that the TKDL, because it is this digital database online, can always be expanded. It can always shift. You can add access and things like that. And in thinking through about, what are the benefits and drawbacks, because the TKDL has received a lot of criticism as well. What Gupta said is, the problem with the TKDL is it's a double-edged weapon, meaning that, it could misappropriate the knowledge to a point never intended. There may be disagreements in a place as diverse as India about what should be done with it, what should be preserved, how many resources should be dedicated to the TKDL. What he said is the problem is ours, and what he meant is India's. So the solution must also be ours. Nobody else can tell us. So I think in thinking about seeds too, and whether or not a database could be the appropriate mechanism, thinking about what belongs in the database, what should be prioritized, how many resources can be devoted, and thinking about resources in an ongoing manner, because these databases require long-term upkeep and annual upkeep. And then also this question about who should have access is one of the biggest questions, and then how do you maintain that access? Who's the authority? But all these other questions around how that resource can be used and supported into the future. So I just want to stop there and say thank you very much.